Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ and Friends. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and my guest today is none other than Dr. Alan Goldhamer. He comes on the second Wednesday of the month at 10 a.m. Pacific time, and he's here to answer any of your questions, especially about whether or not therapeutic medically supervised water-only fasting may be right for you. He's the co-founder of the TrueNorth Health Center, as well as the co-author of The Pleasure Trap and his latest book, Can Fasting Save Your Life? A must-read. Please welcome him to the show. So what's new in the world of water fasting, Dr. Goldhamer?
Well, it's the same old, AJ. Patients fast, patients get better. Everybody's always surprised.
It never gets old, does it?
No, sometimes we have a weekly grand rounds meeting on Mondays and we review all of the active patients with all of the attendings. And I have to admit, I've been doing this now for over 40 years. And it just every week it's the same little experience where it's like, oh my gosh, it's still working. It's like it just seems too good to be true. And I keep thinking one day it'll stop working, but so far it keeps going.
That's amazing. Well, we have questions that were sent in advance, and we'll also, if we have time, look through the chat for some questions. So why don't we start with one of them? All right. Okay, this is a question from Becky, and she would like to know if one of the True North doctors could act as a consultant for a 32-year-old female newly diagnosed with Crohn's.
Mhm. Yeah, and again, our attendings are used to working with autoimmune disease, including Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. And we do have an active telemedicine practice, so they would be able to access them through Zoom or through the phone for phone coaching services. And Crohn's is interesting. Like many autoimmune diseases, this is a situation where the body's immune system is attacking its own tissues. And there's lots of different theories about why genetically vulnerable people have these reactions, but one of them has to do with what you put in your mouth. So there are certain foods that, particularly animal foods, meat, fish, fowl, eggs, and dairy products, and ultra-processed foods, refined carbohydrates, sugar, oil, salt, that alter the inflammatory processes in the body. Inflammation can lead to what's called gut leakage, where you get materials going through the tight junctions in the intestinal tract between the cells that introduce proteins into the body that the immune system can react to inappropriately. In other words, some people's immune system can become confused by this gut leakage process where it begins to attack its own tissues. If it happens to attack the colon tissues, we might call it Crohn's disease or colitis. If it attacks the joints, you might call it arthritis. If it attacks the lungs, you might call it asthma. But the point is, the immune system overreacting to your own tissues. And a part of that is thought to be gut leakage. And gut leakage can be aggravated by the things that cause inflammation, which include the use of animal processed and ultra processed foods, which is why, although under conventional treatment, outcomes are poor, with diet and lifestyle changes, outcomes can often be very good. The conventional approach is essentially shutting down the immune system with powerful drugs like steroids. And at first, that's like a dream because people's pain goes down, but then it becomes a nightmare because it turns out you need your immune system. And when you shut the immune system off with drugs like steroids or methotrexate or whatever, you can get secondary effects that can become sometimes worse even than what the original condition is. So our approach is clean up the diet, get rid of the inflammation. If it's appropriate, use fasting, sometimes prolonged water-only fasting till the inflammation heals. And then eliminate the meat, fish, fowl, eggs, dairy products, low salt, and sugar, and processed foods so that the inflammation doesn't come back. And then you can manage those patients oftentimes very well without medication. The problem is they're not cured. If they go back to eating the foods that cause the problem, eventually the problems come back. And so you have to be willing to make a commitment to eating and living healthfully in order to sustain long-term results in autoimmune disease.
She wanted to know if you have any specific dietary advice for somebody
Mhm.
newly diagnosed with Crohn's. One thing I've heard you say, and this is where you're different than a lot of the other plant-based doctors, you don't like nutritional yeast. And my understanding is for this disease especially, right? It's not favorable.
Well, yeah, I'm not I would get rid of all the ultra-processed foods, including yeast, which actually technically is a single-celled organism. But anyway, so yeah, we want to get rid of all of these hyper-processed foods that might be associated with problems and focus on, particularly in Crohn's disease, you're thinking about what is going to be relatively easy for the digestive system to process. And so think about what foods would you feed an infant? And why would you, give an infant certain kinds of foods and not other foods? And it's because the infant's digestive system isn't fully developed. It'll do better with starchy vegetables and things of that nature. It wouldn't do so well with other more antagonistic products. And so, you know, that's a good place to start in general thinking. It's like, what could I feed an infant that would probably be well digested and well tolerated? And often those foods are often the foods that do well with patients that have Crohn's disease, at least until the inflammation goes down and they can handle a bigger varied diet.
Thanks. This is from Heidi, and she says Walter Longo suggests eating the same kinds of food our ancestors ate to avoid digestive issues and diseases, and to avoid foods they didn't eat. My ancestors didn't eat healthy sweet potatoes and quinoa and turmeric that I eat. Is there any science to back this up?
Well, I think the basic principle is valid. The idea that, you want to eat foods that human beings have been eating. And for 200,000 years, human beings ate largely whole, unprocessed foods. And depending on which area they lived in, it might be, tubers or it might be other types of starchy vegetables. But the idea is those whole foods were the foods that we've eaten for 200,000 years. It's only the last 200 years since the Industrial Revolution that we've begun to eat ultra processed foods, where we take a few grains like wheat, soy, and corn, add sugar, oil, and salt to them and call them food. And so if we want to get rid of all the ultra processed foods and then focus on the whole foods that are, each individual, uniquely can handle most appropriately, or preferably a variety of those foods. I think there's some advantage of getting some diversity in the diet, not just eating, say, only potatoes or only sweet potatoes or whatever it is, but finding a variety of foods that you can thrive on. And then you get a variety of nutrient bases and that's probably a good long-term solution.
Great, thank you. This is from Brigide. If a person is overweight and then starts a water fast, how long does it take for autophagy to begin? Do they have to
Mhm.
lose all the weight first? And please explain what autophagy is, because I don't think everyone
So
knows.
autophagy is it's self-autophagy eating. So it's how the body's immune system gets rid of the old cells, the decrepit cells, and the cancerous cells. So the body has this system of going in and doing housekeeping every day. And if you can manage to eat up the old cells and the senescent cells and the cancer cells faster than you form them, then you maintain some level of health. If the cancer cells grow faster than you can get rid of them, then eventually you get tumors and have problems, and it may become a limiting factor. So the idea is always trying to either reduce the stress in the body by eating clean or increase the body's ability to heal itself by creating the environment that's conducive with healing, by getting rid of the stresses that inhibit the body and trying to get that balance in your favor. When you think about natural therapies like fasting, that's what you're trying to do, is trying to get rid of stuff faster than you're forming it so you kind of catch up and clean house. And even conventional therapies like immunotherapy, what they're trying to do is stimulate the body's immune system to get rid of the cancer cells faster than you're forming them. And if they're successful and you can minimize secondary side effects, that might actually help people live longer and better. And even traditional therapies like surgery and chemotherapy and radiation, that's the idea behind it. The problem with some of those conventional therapies, though, is they can cause a lot of secondary effects and side effects. So you have to make sure that the benefits outweigh the negatives, or you end up with a negative health quality. And then, of course, the premise is always, is what we're doing going to help us live better or going to help us live longer, or preferably both? Some things might help you live longer, but not necessarily better because of side effects. Some things might help you live better, but may not necessarily help you live longer. For example, a surgery of a spinal mass may not necessarily result in a longer life, but it might result in a much better life while you're alive because of eliminating the pain or the other problems. So we always have to differentiate that and not pretend just because it makes you live longer, it necessarily makes you live better.
Great, thank you. Here's another question from Heidi. She said, Dr. McDougall suggested garlic and oat bran for natural means of lowering cholesterol numbers when eating his diet. Does garlic powder and steel-cut oats and oat groats have the same or better results?
I don't know if they're better results. We do know that, all fibers tend to bind fats, which is useful, and oats are particularly effective. And there has been some evidence people, including those, maintain average lower cholesterol levels. I mean, the first premise is, though, how important is it for you individually to lower cholesterol levels to a given specific standards? Remember, different people produce different levels of cholesterol. Elevated cholesterol without the other risk factors associated may not have a significant effect on your coronary artery disease. So in other words, they can be a marker rather than a causal agent. Some people just make higher cholesterol levels, but if their CRPs and their inflammatory indices are low, they tend not to get coronary artery disease despite that. So I think it's a more complicated question than just does something lower cholesterol or not. I mean, the first question is how important is it to have cholesterol at a given marker? The fact that vegetarians, for example, on average maintain lower cholesterol levels is true. That doesn't mean that the benefit of being a vegetarian diet is because of an average lower cholesterol. It may be association, but not necessarily causation.
Great. Thank you. There was somebody on Instagram who's watching saying, can you do fasting if you're going through the transition of menopause?
Mm, I would certainly say yes. In fact, one of the discomforts of menopausal transition are symptoms that are often mitigated with fasting. Many times we've had people come in with lots of hot flashes and stuff before, and after fasting, those are mitigated, in some cases eliminated entirely. It's also interesting to note, at least in my experience, long-standing vegan patients that are living healthfully oftentimes have a much easier transition apparently through menopause than people that are on greasy, fatty, slimy processed food diets and maintaining obesity and the other normal factors that most people have when they reach menopause.
Thank you. And another Instagram viewer named Rita would like to know, does it help with hypercholesteremia?
Yeah, so high cholesterol levels are impacted by fasting. Now, interestingly enough, during fasting itself, cholesterol levels may go up. And you might say, well, why would they go up during fasting? But when you think about it, if you're mobilizing fatty infiltrating your blood vessels full of cholesterol, where would that cholesterol go? Into the bloodstream. And so temporarily, you may notice a rise in cholesterol, but then that's why we always wait 6 weeks post recovery, because at that point you oftentimes notice an overall reduction in cholesterol. I'll give you an example, AJ. We recently had a vegan patient here who was, within a couple pounds of her optimum weight, but had congenital hypercholesteremia. Cholesterol levels were 265. And interestingly enough, apolipoprotein levels, lipoprotein little a, in particular, the genetic marker for cardiovascular disease was over 300. 5 days of water fasting resulted not only in a 40-point drop in cholesterol levels in this longstanding vegan, but a 100-point drop in supposedly untreatable lipoprotein little a. So even though diet alone may not be sufficient at reducing some of these markers, fasting in conjunction with it, at least in some cases, does appear to be highly effective. And in fact, we've published a paper on 2 case reports now on the resolution of lipoprotein little a with fasting, and now we're actually collecting a large number of patients. So we'll be interested to see how many people we can piss off with that data soon enough.
Why is it that some people are master fasters and can go 30 and 40 days and other people like me can barely go 3? What is it about a
Well,
person's?
some people are living healthily, so they don't have massive reserves like you, AJ. So you wouldn't be able to do, say, a 30-day fast easily because you just don't have 30 days worth of excess fuel in your body. Some people are storing larger quantities of fuel in their body, so their capacity to go longer might be greater. There may be other factors. Some people have challenges in terms of how they metabolically process materials. And so that's one of the reasons why, for example, people that absorb food really easily and they get huge, that's not necessarily mean they have a problem. It means they're eating a diet that's more concentrated. You put those people on a healthier diet, then they get smaller, okay? But some people, no matter what they eat, are going to be smaller because they're not as efficient absorbers. Getting somebody that gets fat easily, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That may be a good thing biologically speaking. It's just they can't get away with eating an ultra processed diet. And so depending on a person's reserves, both macro and micronutrient reserves will depend on how long they're able to fast. Now, the good news is thin people don't necessarily need to fast as long in order to get a good result because they're able to get to whatever the issue is quicker, and they don't have some of the problems that people are carrying 100 pounds of extra tissue around do. So I wouldn't look at quantity of fasting as a marker or an indicator of success. We've had a lot of success in people doing, several shorter fasts over time. not just with people that do, very long fast.
No. Well, speaking of shorter fasts, Lois would like to know if a person can safely do their own water fast at home for 3 days. You have people that
Well,
can.
everybody can fast safely at home, but we recommend 12 to 16 hours on a daily basis. So don't eat 3 to 4 hours before you go to bed. And then if you're trying to lose weight, you might even delay breakfast a bit until you do some exercise in the morning. If you're going to go over 16 hours, you just like whether it's at home or whether it's at TrueNorth Health Center, there's three things you always need to ensure. Number one, are you a good candidate for fasting? To answer that question, make sure you've read Can Fast and Save Your Life. And if you have any questions, give us a call. We offer a free phone conversation to help answer that question. Number two, if you're going to fast, you have to rest. So you're not driving to work and carrying on normal activities when you're fasting. And three, you have to maintain hydration and ensure appropriate refeeding after fasting. So if you're a good candidate for fasting and you have provisions to be able to rest and you are going to refeed properly, then fasting should be safe and effective regardless of where it is you do it. There's advantages to doing it in a controlled setting. But it certainly can be done at home. In fact, now we do through our telemedicine practice, we promote support people who can work with their local doctor to do remote fasting if the circumstances are appropriate. But I wouldn't recommend people arbitrarily doing fasting until they make sure they've answered those questions properly. For example, people on medications are not going to be water fasting. If they are, they can get themselves into trouble by potentiating their medications. They don't want to just arbitrarily discontinue their medications because that can be a significant problem. And three, they also want to make sure that they have provisions for rest and proper realimentation so they don't get into more trouble than they've created.
Great, thank you. Louisa would like to know what your thoughts on probiotics are.
Well, there's both prebiotics and probiotics. The most important is the prebiotics. That is the diet that you eat that creates the environment that allow the thousand strain of organisms to live in your healthy gut. Probiotics are substances that are added after the fact with the theory that you can somehow repopulate the gut microbiome with favorable organisms. And these are used particularly in people that have had digestive issues or their post-antibiotic treatment and whatnot. And there may be some limited utility to these therapeutically, but the bigger issue is get the flora in the gut proper by having the proper prebiotic intake, which is the proper diet, the vegetable cellulose that the organisms need to eat. So whether you take probiotics or not is not going to make up for not getting the diet right.
Got it. Thank you. This is a question from Lisa. Many cities have high pollution days regularly. What can we do on a regular basis to clean our lungs? For example, going into a steam room or using a humidifier?
Mm-hmm. So one thing I would recommend is to move out of the cities that have regularly elevated pollution levels. If you live in those cities, maybe you should move to better cities like Santa Rosa. If you are going to live in those cities, though, you can get HEPA filters into your, especially where you sleep, run those during the day so you can eliminate the antigens and the pollens and some of the pollutants that can be affected by an effective HEPA and charcoal-based system. You can try to avoid particularly heavy areas of exposure. And then you can eat a whole plant food SOS-free diet, which in general is going to help give you better resilience and resistance to dealing with the effects of pollution. I don't think there's a specific food, though, per se, that's going to somehow magically undo the exposure that you get to the various pollutants.
Thank you. Eve on Instagram is asking if can endocrine disrupting chemicals stored in fat cells be eliminated with fasting? And maybe you can talk about what that means.
So there's chemicals that people get exposed to from plastics and other sources that can thought to accumulate inside the cells of the body, including the fat cells. Things like PCB, dioxin, et cetera. There's lots of different chemicals we're exposed to. And there have been studies showing that they do fat biopsies before and after fasting and show total body reduction of some of these fat-soluble nutrients after fasting. In fact, some people say that fasting is so good at this that you shouldn't do it, that you should never water fast because you would too rapidly detoxify and your body doesn't know what it's doing. Unless, of course, you take their proprietary products. If you take their pills and potions, then apparently fasting is entirely acceptable. That's not been our experience. Our experience is the body is well equipped at mobilizing and eliminating these materials. Sometimes in the process of eliminating, you may get symptoms which are unpleasant. That's why fasting can sometimes be an intense and rather miserable experience. But the net effect of it is generally quite positive, including in, we believe, dropping total body loads of these toxins.
Thank you. Dixie, hi Dixie, who's watching live, would like to know if water fasting can help with sporadic increased heart palpitations.
Well, it may help or it might aggravate it. Sometimes the dehydration that's associated with fasting and the electrolyte challenges can actually make cardiac arrhythmias worse. And that's why some conditions like atrial fibrillation, uh, especially when people are on anticoagulant therapy, we probably wouldn't be doing water-only fasting. People that have potential complications from physiological dehydration, we might do juice fasting or modify it in order to be able to accommodate. However, if the problem is lack of blood flow into the SA node or something like that, and the vessels open up, that might explain why some of our patients that have had problems with atrial fibrillation actually got significant improvement after fasting. Whether it's the weight loss or the fasting itself is still to be determined.
Perfect, thank you. Miss Vicky would like to know if fibro patients should avoid inflammatory veggies. What are inflammatory veggies?
Well, I assume they're talking about veggies that are naturally higher in fats because it's generally the higher fats, but that's not been my experience. Generally, fruits and vegetables are generally well tolerated by patients with fibromyalgia. I think the bigger problems are the oils, the animal foods, the sugar, the highly processed foods, the inflammatory foods that aggravate the gut. But there may be individuals that have sensitivities to certain things like nuts or avocado or something like that, and it's perfectly fine to modulate your exposure because there's no one essential food that without which you can't thrive.
Great. I love that you say that. Cheryl says, does fasting help with migraine headaches? I get a headache even when I do intermittent fasting.
Well, a lot of people will get headaches just by stopping the drugs they're addicted to, like caffeine or modulating their diet. And so some of the headaches that are, quote, associated with fasting are not actually from fasting, they're associated with detoxification from caffeine and other things. That's why we always get people to try to stop caffeine and whatnot a couple days before they start fasting. Then they can tell what's actually from fasting and what's actually just from their body detoxifying itself. And yes, many of our patients with chronic headaches and head pain have gotten dramatic improvement. We've had some fabulous cases of people, not the least of which was a woman who had unrelenting head pain, 8 out of 10 for 16 years, and was able to get a resolution with 41 days of water-only fasting. So some patients do get experience, not all patients, not the headaches are not all the same cause. And so it's not surprising that some things respond well and some things don't respond as well. We also provide manual therapies like chiropractic and osteopathic manipulation and physical therapy and exercise, all of which can be affect patients that are suffering with migraines. Encouraging people to get adequate sleep can be an important issue. Avoiding dietary triggers and environmental triggers can also be helpful in helping patients that are dealing with migraines and making sure that they're not having other factors that are mimicking that. Sometimes you have to differentiate migraine attacks from things like transient ischemic attacks and other issues. But that's where having a doctor who's competent can be very helpful.
Thank you. Olafson says, I have lupus and I can be prone to seizures. Do I need to worry about my brain getting enough nutrients? Is that meaning in general or during fasting? I'm guessing.
Yes, you would always want to make sure your brain got all the things that it needs, and that's going to be true whether you're fasting or whether you're feeding. All the more reason to adopt a whole plant food SOS-free diet to ensure that you are getting the quality and quantity of nutrients that you're going to need and reduce the inflammatory components that contributes to these autoimmune diseases.
Great. Mia wants to know, how long can you water fast if you have osteoporosis?
What's interesting is we did a study looking at the bone density changes with fasting, and it turns out there is no significant bone density changes in fasting. Fat goes down, visceral fat goes down, water, protein, fiber, and glycogen go down, but bone density remained unchanged with our DEXA scanner-based studies. Lean tissues recover, but fat loss continues. So it really is a way of helping transform body composition.
I was thinking when we were talking about if fasting could help with migraines, maybe that would be a good time to share the story of Christina, because was hers a migraine or what was her condition?
No, she had secondary to a traumatic injury. They thought it was a dural tear, and for whatever reason, it never healed. And she had all those years of constant daily head pain. And she did fast 41 days, recovered. Later, did another 40-day fast, and now she has 12 years without having headaches. So she's we're starting to think now that she's had 12 years without any headaches that she's probably likely better.
That's amazing. Yeah, I know her. She's fantastic. Susanna would like to know if fasting can help with osteoarthritis of the hands that came on suddenly. Been eating this way 3 years, lost 80 pounds, now at a healthy weight.
Yes, osteoarthritis is one of the conditions that responds well to fasting, but it's a little bit of an annoying condition because many times just getting the diet changes ready to do the fasting, the preparatory diet, is enough to start mitigating the symptoms. So some of the patients come in, they're already better before we even get to them, so we can't take credit for it.
You're funny. Peachy says, I'm a thin, healthy senior female who's been following a whole food plant-based diet 15 plus years and trying to find a balance of how much to eat and when to finish my last meal for bed for optimum sleep.
So you want to figure out what time is the best time for you to go to bed, and then subtract 3 to 4 hours from that, and that's the time to finish eating. You don't want to eat 3 to 4 hours before you go to sleep.
What do you tell people like when they're shift workers, when they have to work the night shift? How do you recommend they eat?
Well, I remind people when they do night shift that they'll pay a price for that. That it's harder to maintain optimum health with shift work than you would if you could have a consistent schedule. And we do exactly the same thing. There's still going to be 3 to 4 hours before you go to sleep. We stop eating, try to have a 12-hour fasting period, and then eat during that 8-hour window.
Thanks. Would a 24-hour water fast at home be of benefit?
I don't recommend that. I recommend 12 to 16 hours of fasting every day for everyone. If you're going to go over 16 hours, then you have to make sure that you're a good candidate for fasting, you're fasting in a restful state, and that you have appropriate, realimentation after fasting.
Okay. Anna says, any advice, how can I get past 3 days on a water fast? I would like to be able to do 7 days of a water fast. I'm healthy, but 20 pounds overweight, a middle-aged woman. I feel so weak and sick after day 2.
Well, the hardest part of fasting is the transition between feeding and fasting, and that happens between day 2 or 3 or 4, depending on the person. When you shift from glycogen metabolism to feeding, what I would suggest is number one, really careful preparation for fasting, and do that fast, particularly that first fast in an inpatient setting like TrueNorth Health Center, where we can help you get through that transition. Once you kick those enzyme systems in, you may find subsequent fasts will go somewhat easier.
Thank you. Okay. Does cooking legumes in the Instant Pot without soaking first and consuming legume and water have any health trade-offs from anti-nutrients versus soaking? I don't really understand that question, but
Okay, well, there is some idea that if you soak your food before you prep them, and if you use higher temperatures like the Instant Pot or pressure cooking, that you may break down some of the less desirable components in food or the allergenic components of food. There's also concerns that higher temperature may have other changes. Maybe they're not so good. I don't know that there's much research that's really conclusive one way or the other. But the Instant Pot or pressure cooking in general does provide the convenience because you can get, higher temperatures allow for more rapid food preparation. It can be very convenient for people.
yeah. Okay, great. Tina says, I water fasted 72 hours and had blood glucose of 53. Should I worry? I am pre-diabetic.
No, blood glucose in the 50s is normal during fasting. I mean, it's a normal, blood sugar levels drop. That's a normal, what you would expect to happen as you convert into burning fat instead of burning sugar.
Oh, your sound just got so much better. I don't know what you did. But what is in it? What is there a certain number in blood sugar that you will stop the fast or refeed or give them juice or
Well,
something?
we have a increased when blood sugars go below 45 milligram percent, we have a higher ratio of monitoring. We'll monitor patients, but I see pressure sometimes even go into the 30 percentile, and patients do fine. Depends on the patient. There's no absolute value in that range that would say terminate the fast, but it would require a higher level of monitoring.
Wow. Thank you. A lot of people in the chat are talking about dry fasting. Can you say what that is and how you feel about it?
Well, dry fasting is fasting without water, and it's not physiologically sound, in my opinion, because the water provides the solute that gives the body the opportunity to get rid of the toxins that are mobilized. If there's no water, there's no way for your kidneys to process the blood and eliminate those materials, and it'll result in dehydration and eventually organ failure. And I think, there have been instances of some of the advocates of dry fasting actually going into kidney failure secondary to overloading the kidneys by not providing fluid. So fasting implies that they have enough water in order to give the body a vehicle, a solute, in order to be able to get rid of the toxins. Without that, it's just going to build up, and that's going to be a challenge. Now, I know there's some spiritual practices that think that's a great thing, but it's certainly not, from a biological viewpoint, something I would consider desirable, advisable. We certainly don't recommend it.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. Okay. Claudia says, how do you cure yourself from histamine intolerance, which started after the COVID vaccine? It causes me migraines. And maybe you could say what histamine intolerance is, because a lot of these things people may not know.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of mast cell activation and all kinds of things where people get inappropriate reaction to these chemicals that are naturally produced by the body, overabundance of histamine production. And it is true that after people have had COVID or take the COVID vaccine, some of these underlying autoimmune type symptoms are activated. What we do is we water fast people. In fact, we've got some papers now showing good resolution of long COVID type syndromes. And some of these patients also who have had history with chronic Lyme, et cetera, get similar types of symptom complexes that often do respond to fasting. So our approach is, if it's appropriate, fasting, followed by a low antigenic whole plant food diet. And oftentimes we'll get significant improvements in people's complex symptoms.
Terrific. All right. Caribbean Dreams. Dr. Goldhamer, is there any chance you can help me with stage 4 metastatic melanoma? Oncologists kicked me to the curb when I declined TIL procedure.
Okay, well, I'm not an expert in the medical management of stage 4 melanoma, so I don't know what medical treatments are or not available, and if there, what immunotherapy or other options might be available. Our approach isn't going to be fundamentally any different with stage 4 melanoma. Isn't going to be any other cancer patient. If it's appropriate, we'll utilize fasting. We're going to advocate a health promoting diet and lifestyle. And, are there additional things that you can do to stimulate the immune system, et cetera? I would defer to Dr. Chilla Varas on our staff, who's a naturopathic physician. He's certainly versed in all of those weird and wonderful outside agent kind of things. It's not my area of expertise. But to the degree that fasting is appropriate, we would certainly utilize fasting to try to boost the immune system. I don't think it's a proven standalone effective treatment for melanoma or any other form of cancer, but I do believe that it can be a useful tool in helping get the body to kind of do a better job of augmenting its natural immunity.
Great. Thank you. All right. Is fasting good for rheumatoid arthritis?
Yeah, there's actually quite a bit of studies on rheumatoid arthritis, objective and subjectively, improving with fasting and a vegetarian diet. That's one of the few things that was actually in the scientific literature, even when I was growing up. You could see rheumatoid arthritis was a condition that clearly had been demonstrated to be influenced by fasting.
So rheumatoid and osteo, how are they different?
Well, rheumatoid arthritis is an autoimmune disease where the body's attacking its own tissues. Osteoarthritis, inflammatory condition, not thought to be, it's not the same category of condition. Both of them happen to respond well to dietary manipulation. So osteoarthritis is more of a wear and tear. You get degenerative joint changes. You get some inflammation associated. Both of them associated with inflammation, which results in pain. But one of them, is a autoimmune situation where the body is attacking itself. The other is inflammation. I don't know exactly clear about how all those inflammatory pathways are elucidated, but a different category of disease responsive to a different approach medically, and certainly both of them respond to what we're advocating.
Perfect. All right. Lois wants to know, should I not eat steamed white rice at all because of its low nutrient value?
Well, you would try to use brown rice as a healthier grain. If you were in a situation where there was no brown rice available, uh, and you wanted to eat, that might be an occasional option and exception, but it certainly wouldn't be as desirable as going to brown rice. I don't think it's the end of the world. White rice, I mean, you have populations that have largely subsisted on white rice and managed to survive, but it's not as desirable to more processed food. It's got higher caloric density. If you're trying to lose weight, if you're trying to build health, I would use the whole food rather than the processed food.
Perfect. Dr. Lyle's been talking lately about getting foods out of season. Can you please explain what this phrase means and how to do it?
Well, now it's a little different than it might have been in the past because now we're shipping foods all across the country. And so fruits and vegetables have, generally seasons in any given locale. And so the discussion was that maybe you should eat the foods that are ripe in your locale rather than eating foods that, you wouldn't, that in the winter you wouldn't normally have access to, foods in your area that don't normally grow in the winter. I don't know how important it is to eat the foods that would naturally be in the area. I haven't seen compelling evidence that you have to eat foods that are ripe where you're living, but
I think you're thinking of something else. He's talking about like when people have cravings or having to get it out of season, like meaning don't have it in, this is what I believe, like don't have, if peanut butter is a problem for you, don't have it on in your house. It has to go out of season in your life. Does that make sense?
that's a whole different ballgame. I thought we were talking about if you have grapes, you don't eat grapes in the winter because you wouldn't have grapes growing in your local community. But now you can ship them in from Southern California, so you can get them all year. As far as having foods in your environment, yeah, if you want to not eat foods you shouldn't eat, don't bring them into your nest because they will end up on your waist and hips. It's a lot easier to make those decisions if you can't hear the foods calling your name out. Now, I know some people say, well, they can hear the foods calling all the way from the corner store and stuff, so they have to get extra help. But the idea is bring the foods into your house that you want to eat. And if you're bringing foods into your house thinking, well, I'm not going to eat these, that's delusional.
Okay, perfect. Um, so Scott wants to know, would you recommend a water fast over a whole food plant-based diet for someone dealing with food addiction?
Well, I would always recommend a whole plant food diet for everybody, food addiction or not. And then if for some reason we weren't able to achieve the desired results with diet alone, or we were having trouble getting people to eat that whole plant food diet, then I would consider whether fasting might have an appropriate tool at helping them make that transition to a whole plant food diet. You have to be careful with patients that have eating disorders because fasting can be a trigger for people. And coming off fasting is really critical. We have a different standard. Person with eating disorder, we want to have at least the length of the fast recovery feeding so that we have a chance to establish good behavior patterns. Fasting is not for everybody with eating disorders. However, having said that, many of our patients with a history of eating disorders have derived significant benefit from the use of fasting, but it's way more complicated than a person that doesn't have those kind of predispositions.
Right. I don't know what this means. What does low caloric mean? I don't know what that means. Was it
Low
low?
caloric,
It just said
probably
it.
my lack of enunciation. It was probably low caloric rather than
How long does it take to get to True North to do a water fast?
how long does it take to get in?
Yes.
Well, in the past, we were running 2 to 3 months booked, but I'm happy to say that as of maybe today, we have finished the last of the renovations. We were adding 9 new rooms to our campus, and most of those are now in service, and some are coming into service in the next week or two. So at least for a while, it'll be a little bit easier because that's going to help, take care of some of the overbooking that we've been dealing with. And we added another, what we call a dog house, a house that accommodates pet and has a little yard so that the dogs can be happy when they're there. So we have 2 of those now instead of one. So that'll help because it was taking a long time for people that had to have a pet be able to get in. Now we have a little bit more accommodation.
Great. Thank you. Alita says, how bad is it to eat before sleep? I have a bad habit of doing that.
Yeah, don't do that. That's not good. First of all, the food you eat tends to be converted and stored as fat more efficiently. Second of all, it disrupts the quality of your sleep. Third, you have to get up and pee and empty your bladder and other stuff. You don't get as good a digestion. So, and also tendency to overeat. So the food you're eating late at night is not because you're hungry, it's because you're bored or tired and you need to stop it. So eat your final meal, stop eating 3 to 4 hours before you go to bed, and do that for a while and see if you don't function better and thrive better.
Uh, Tia says, can someone on GERD medication do a prolonged fast? And I want to ask you, every time I fast by day 2, my throat is so burning. It's like it burns like
Yeah,
ridiculous.
there's some reflux and hyperacidity early on in fasting. It can be a problem. Sometimes we actually have to go on to juices or broth for a few days till that calms down, and then often we can go back into more detailed fasting. The net result of fasting often improves GI problems, but it can be absolutely miserable initially in terms of dealing with it, particularly for people that have been on omeprazole and other, inhibitors. And so there's a drug withdrawal effect. There's a correcting the underlying problem. It can be very, very, very challenging. Sometimes we have to do modified fasting in order to get people through that difficulty. But ultimately, it can be a helpful tool in helping reboot that microbiome and normalizing gut function.
Mhm. Coralie says, how long of a fast to prevent metastasis choroidal eye melanoma? And what BMI do I need? Very specific question.
Well, we don't know, for any given individual if it'll work to avoid metastasis or how long or whatever. Those studies obviously be complicated to do and haven't been done. And so as far as fasting duration, don't know. Don't have any way of telling that.
Okay. I should have mentioned at the beginning, I want to point out that Dr. Goldhamer is one of the amazing speakers at the Plant Powered Party in Las Vegas that I have the privilege of
Ah,
hosting. Early bird tickets will only be till March 1st. So I just put a link in the chat if you'd like to see him and ask him more questions. Dr. LIsle will be there as well as Dr. Barnard and Dr. Will Bolshewitz. Straight Bro says, as a chiropractor, do you agree with the use of Percocet, hydrocodone, or other prescription poisons for pain, or do you believe nutrition and fasting instead can rid the body of pain?
well, in my experience, diet and fasting, chiropractic care, physical therapy, and exercise are much more effective for long-term management of pain. But there are situations where pain medications are going to be important. People are having trouble sleeping. They're really distraught, disrupted. These can be an effective temporary way of helping people, cope with what can be extremely distressing pain responses. But I don't ever think it's a good long-term solution. So it's always, better to try to reduce inflammation so that the pain goes down rather than just continue to cover it up. But for example, if maybe not you, AJ, but most people, if they had to go in and have a necessary dental procedure or something, it'd be exquisitely painful. They may use Novocaine or something to mitigate the pain. You wouldn't use Novocaine every day for the rest of your life to mitigate tooth pain, but it might be effective to help you get through a procedure. Um, some people just have a really high pain tolerance. There's actually people in our society that have much higher pain tolerance than others. They're called women, and it allows them to get through really exquisitely discomforting things like pregnancy and stuff like that. That's why men don't have babies, because they're just not capable of really putting up with it. In fact, it's interesting. AJ, I did the math one time and figured out that if men had babies, our species would have been extinct within 20 generations. Because it turns out you need to have 2.1 births per couple in order for a species to survive. And if men have the babies, I have proof that there would never, ever, ever would have been a second birth, not even one time. And in 20 generations, the population would have then become extinct.
Yeah, didn't they do a movie with that with Arnold Schwarzenegger?
Don't know. I might have missed it.
Okay, I forget what it's called. Okay, Claudia says, what are your thoughts about castor oil? Is it safe to use on your eyelids or thyroid? As I've heard different opinions on this.
Wait, you're talking about using it externally or internally?
I believe externally.
Well, yeah, I, I don't know that there's be any great problem using castor oil
She
externally,
says, is
but
it safe to use on your eyelids or thyroid? I'm guessing externally.
I'm not quite sure why, you know, how it's supposed to be effective. And I don't know of any problems applying castor oil externally. I know they use castor oil packs that are supposed to have a drawing effect or something, but I don't know if it actually works.
Thanks. And there's a question, but doesn't brown rice have more arsenic than white rice? So shouldn't we be
Yes,
eating white rice?
yes, it does. Brown rice may have a little higher concentration because the way rice is grown, it can absorb materials. If there's arsenic in the soil, and there's high arsenic levels in the soil where they grow cotton and they've used, pesticides and whatnot. So what I would say, if you want to minimize accumulation of this and other naturally occurring or unnaturally occurring heavy metals in food, try to get organically grown brown rice. I buy rice grown from Lundberg Farms, grown in California, because they list on their site what the naturally occurring arsenic levels were, and they're growing on land that hasn't been used for cotton, so they don't have the high arsenic pesticide histories. So that may, and also you can change how you prepare rice. If you prepare rice like you would pasta, 5-to-1 water ratio, you will have lower arsenic levels residual. You'll also have lower minerals in general because it tends to flush it out. So So white rice, by removing the hull and whatnot, you may have lower levels, but you also have lower levels of essential nutrients as well, and you don't have the fiber. So I would still advocate brown rice, but try to minimize the naturally occurring exposure by getting organically grown rice from companies like Lundberg that will at least disclose what the actual levels are.
Great, thank you. There's a question if you know when your TED talk that you gave in the fall will be available. You gave it somewhere in the East
Yeah.
Coast.
So it's being edited right now. I know I probably said some offensive things that might have to be filtered, but it's supposed to be coming out like literally any week now.
Cool. Excellent. Okay, this question. Does eating ultra low fat make your body more efficient at storing fat when later on you decide to eat fat?
I don't know. I mean, that's a very good question. I don't know if your fat exposure affects your fat absorbability. That may be known. I don't know the answer though.
Great. Yeah, I get that question a lot and nobody seems to know the answer. So where do we find out the answer to a question that nobody knows the answer to?
Well, we go to the scientific literature and see what kind of studies have been done. So that's a question I'll ask our director of research, Tasha Myers, and she may be able to find out what the actual answer is.
Okay. Is melatonin ever recommended for sleep?
Yeah, there is some evidence that exogenous use of melatonin may have some beneficial effects clinically. And I know that some of our attendings will, on occasion, use melatonin supplementation therapeutically to help people while they're trying to reestablish healthy sleep patterns.
Okay, thanks. Trying to see if there's any more questions in the chat. Okay, I gotta look a couple of different places.
Hey, I have a question for you, AJ.
Yeah.
How many questions did Dr. Lyle get to in
Oh,
the
you know what? Oh, I can probably look it up, and what Dr. Goldhamer is referring to is they both are instructors or lecturers in the reboot program, which ends actually, I believe, today. And I think you got through 110 in 3 hours. Okay, I have the pages of his right here because he's coming on the show next week to answer the other ones.
Mhm.
So let's see, he got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So he got more than the 4 that you
He
recommend.
got five?
Oh, he got more than 5. He got 6,
Oh
7,
man, I was
7,
wrong
8,
because
9, 10. Hold on, let me count all the pages. 11, 12, 13, 14. He got 14 done.
yeah, because I think I suggested he would get to seven. So he doubled my prediction. I was wrong.
That's pretty good. You what is this basketball thing you guys are doing? And can we
So
watch
we're
it?
entering there's a tournament, a senior tournament in Florida, basketball tournament, but it's based on age. So they have a bracket which is 65 and older. So now we're going to get to be the youngest guys instead of the oldest guy. We're always usually 20, 30 years older than everybody else. But this particular tournament draws competitors from around the country based on age. So it's the U.S. a senior national basketball championship. So we're on a team that will be competing in that. I think there's 11 teams that are competing for this tournament. It goes over 4 days. And so we'll see, how well we can compete. But I'm just excited about finally having people older than I am to play against. So that'll be good. Oh,
Wow.
and I didn't tell you, AJ, but I've been in this continual quest to try to beat Dr. Lau. Well, that's what's been driving me for over 50 years. And the I had practiced for about 6 months, and he hadn't even played basketball for weeks. And I just casually said to him one day, "Well, why don't we have a free throw shooting contest?" And after practicing for 6 months, I went out there and I hit 48 out of 50, and I thought, I got him. And he shot 19, he missed one, and then he hit 80 in a row. So that was frustrating. So then I went and I've been practicing, and just recently I managed to match his 99 out of 100, but I only got 70 in a row. So I still haven't been able to beat him, but I'm letting him know, I'm coming up on his heels. I'm hoping to be able to beat his 80 in a row there.
Oh
But I
man.
did get 70 in a row and 99 out of 100 a few weeks ago. So I'm feeling like I'm at least making progress now.
Well, I would love to see that game. And if somebody wants to learn how to play basketball for Dr. Goldhamer, he'll be at the next excursion at Rancho La Puerta, July 19th through 26th. And both Dr. Goldhamer and I are doing a weekend, a getaway at the Mendocino spa called Stanford Inn. And please go to chefaj.com.
Do
And
they have basketball at the Stanford Inn?
I am going to find that out because that's on the top of my list. They're going to come
Because
on the show before.
in
Yeah.
Rancho La Puerta, what I would like to do is teach people how to shoot free throws, because that's something everybody can do. And there's some basic principles you can do or likely improve your free throw shooting percentage. So
Just
that's something we can have a little free throw instruction there.
Yeah, you were great. Amazing. So, Dr. Goldhammer, just for fun, I put in the question about does eating an ultra low fat diet make your body become more efficient at fat when you start eating it? And ChatGPT had a great answer. I mean,
What did it say?
well, I got to get my glasses on because it's long, but I thought it was really interesting. It said if someone eats an ultra low fat diet for a long time, their body may downregulate fat metabolism since dietary fat isn't regularly available. If they suddenly consume a high fat diet, they might initially store more fat because their metabolism isn't primed efficiently to burn it. Ultra low fat, even if fat storage becomes more efficient, weight gain still depends on total caloric intake versus expenditure. So if someone suddenly eats less calories, excess calories from fat, they may gain weight. But this isn't because of prior fat restriction. It's more over overall energy balance. And it says that ultra low fat diets can improve insulin sensitivity, which might enhance fat storage under certain conditions, especially if fat is introduced alongside high carb insulin spiking meals. That said, if someone transitions gradually from an ultra low fat diet to incorporating more healthy fats while maintaining a balanced intake, the body is unlikely to become a fat storage machine. The key is maintaining a sustainable and voluntary diet approach rather than extreme fluctuations. And then it talked about enzyme and hormonal changes responsible for fat digestion and oxidation may decrease with prolonged fat intake, especially leading to temporary fat accumulation when fat is reintroduced, but the body can readjust over time. So anyway, what do you think of ChatGPT?
Mm. Digestion is pretty complicated. I would like to hear what Dr. Myers has to say when she reviews the literature, because I think we'll get
Well,
probably a more accurate assessment.
could we get Dr. Myers on the show? Because one thing people talk about a lot that Dr. Clapper has said, and he has said this in the lectures that he gave at True North, even most recently about a year ago, is this thing called I think it was called, was it called oxidative priority about that don't eat fat with carbs in the same meal. So don't have sweet potatoes with peanut sauce or noodles with peanut sauce. If you're going to eat fat, eat it with your vegetables and then have your starch later. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, but I'm not, I think it would be good. Let's plan to bring Dr. Myers on, and maybe we can do that next month. And then we can get more definitive answers to some of these questions that are actually based on actually understanding physiology.
Thank you. I'd love to have her on with you next month. Lori says, do you recommend protein powders if you're on a whole food plant-based diet?
I recommend not eating protein powders, whether you're on a whole plant food diet or not.
Yep. Okay. Here's a question. Paul wants to know, do I need electrolytes, explicit electrolytes when hiking and drinking lots of water as much as 4 liters for long, hot hikes?
Well, if you're doing something like marathon running or you're doing extreme hiking, it does make sense. You need to maintain hydration. And if you just drink water but don't have enough calories and don't have enough minerals, you can eventually get into a dehydrated state. So what we recommend, but it would be the same things you'd normally, instead of drinking Gatorade or something, you can use carrot, celery, apple, beet juice. You could use, fresh fruits or vegetables. You could carry, there's different ways of getting hydration. Some are a little more convenient than others, but I wouldn't necessarily compromise your health or your dietary habits. I would just accommodate within your dietary habits a sufficient caloric and mineral intake so that you can maintain the activity that you're doing.
Yep. Thank you. Uh, Claire wants to know, during chemo, do you think it's important to up plant-based protein? And if so, what is your recommendation for best sources?
No, I think that plant protein, whether it's chemo in pregnancy or any other time, is always going to be around 10% of calories. So if you increase in caloric intake, you'll increase protein intake proportionally. And so I don't think you have to specifically try to load protein. And when you do that by using protein powders and other stuff, there's compromises that can be introduced.
Great, thank you. Claudine says, how much flaxseed is needed to reverse autoimmune disease?
Well, I don't know that there's any amount of flaxseed that's going to guarantee reversing autoimmune disease, but in terms of how much flaxseed do you need to get the essential fatty acids that people need as a component of overall health, even a tablespoon a day of ground flaxseed is going to provide you an abundance of essential fatty acids.
There's a protocol for hypernourishment by one of the doctors, Dr. Brooke Goldner, where people have a half a cup every day in a smoothie.
Yeah, I don't advocate that, but again, you can talk to Dr. Golder and see what her thoughts are.
Yep. She comes on the last Monday of the month. And so is it safer to eat potatoes rather than brown rice since of the arsenic? Is it better to do a different
Well,
straw?
you're likely to have less arsenic on average, but I don't know that the arsenic in brown rice is necessarily cumulatively an issue. There's some toxic materials in all foods. It happens to be because of the way rice is grown, it does a little bit better job of sucking up arsenic if it's there. The more important thing would be not to get abnormal amounts of arsenic because you're not getting rice that's grown on soil that they raised cotton on and sprayed arsenic-rich pesticides on. It's not the rice that's the main problem. It's the contaminants in the soil that can be absorbed into the rice. And again, if you want to cook rice but you don't have control of it, cook 5-to-1 ratio of water instead of 2-to-1 or 3-to-1, and you'll have a lower arsenic and other mineral residual concentration.
Yeah. Susan wants to know, where in Florida are you going to be?
Coral Springs.
Coral Springs.
Coral
Nice.
Springs is where this tournament's going to be. And Dr. LIsle and I will be there, hopefully competing effectively.
I hope so. No, there's no way for people to see it though. They're not streaming it or anything.
Not that I know of, no. There
Darn.
maybe the championship game, if we get to the championship, they might record it and then we'd be able to, post it or something.
There's a question. Why no protein powder? Why no vegan protein powder?
Because the problem is too much protein, not too little protein. Too much protein increases problems with kidney function, osteoporosis, cancer, and other issues. There is no trouble getting enough protein. Its problem is avoiding excess. So taking highly processed foods that are rich in protein and then shoving them in the diet is hardly a health promoting activity.
Thank you. What do you think of Dr. Greger's eating plan? Asks Julia.
I love Dr. Greger. Dr. Greger, and I don't agree with him on everything, but I think he's very intelligent. He's articulate. He's funny, and he does a great job of synthesizing a wide and broad range of materials. He has a really good staff, and I think he does a really effective job of introducing lots of interesting ideas. Again, we can debate about interpretation, specifically on any given item, but overall, I think he does an excellent job, provides a really valuable service, and I happen to really enjoy him personally as well.
Yep, he's great. Okay, what are you most looking forward to in going back to Rancho La Puerta?
Well, I'm looking forward to. I really enjoyed playing basketball there. That was fun, and I think that it's nice to go to a place where there's food that's edible. I enjoyed the hiking. It's a beautiful location. They have a wonderful plant there. Um, so I think pretty much everything that we did there I enjoyed. It was particularly fun with all of AJ's people there. So it's unusual to be in a setting where there's so many interesting, bright people that you can interact with that aren't, completely screwed up and stuff. So that was fun. We had some fun. You had some fun activities. I remember we did that thing with Jennifer and I.
With the shoe
Yeah, with
game.
the shoe, that was kind of fun. So you always come up with some kind of compelling and entertaining activities. So that was enjoyable.
Oh,
And I had access to Wi-Fi, which was great. So I was able to keep up on everything. So I didn't get stressed out about not keeping current on my screening calls and stuff.
yep, you were great. Tina wants to know, is quinoa better to have than brown rice? And Joyce says, is quinoa a grain and is it inflammatory?
Quinoa is not a particularly pro-inflammatory grain. It's going to have a lower uh, exposure to, say, the arsenic than rice might. It has a favorable nutrient breakdown, and it tends to be not particularly anogenic. So I think it would be an acceptable component in the diet.
Perfect. And I think we have time. I know you have to go. One more question. Susanna says there used to be a chat feature on the TrueNorth Health TV for the viewers during the live streams. It's no longer available. Might it be coming back?
Yeah, we are looking to expand and improve our live streaming to include the chat. The problem is it has to be staffed, and so we just haven't been able to generate the resources to be able to handle all of that yet because it's a non-monetized platform. So we are looking to improve it. We're getting some new equipment. We're looking to be able to. We're working with Mr. Gossman to develop a series of new content. So hopefully that'll be coming soon.
Yeah, I noticed there has been some change in it because I used to be able to watch it and like still use my phone, but now it's like you can't jump out of it.
Yeah, we're working on it. That's an in development kind of thing right now. We're just trying to, right now we just did a bunch of physical plant improvements. We're putting in a second orchard and courtyard at the center, AJ, which is going to be really nice. In fact, I meet in about 65 minutes with the landscape architect about we're picking out which fruit trees and whatnot are going into the new orchard. So we're excited about that.
Nice. Well, two more questions just came in, or you can say goodbye. It's up to you.
Okay, I have 3 minutes. So,
Okay, so there's a question from Claudine. How do you respond to people saying to eat more protein for weight loss, bone health, muscle building, and on and on?
well, I disagree. More protein is not the answer. So keeping your protein around 10% of calories is going to be consistent with long-term optimal health. So eating more protein in general, I think, is bad advice.
Yeah. What do you suggest if someone is still hungry after eating lots of food?
Well, sometimes they're hungry because they didn't eat enough food or enough density of food. If they just ate salad, they may still be hungry, so they want to include some steamed and starchy vegetable materials. Or there could be also sometimes people have gastric irritation that they're interpreting as hunger, which isn't necessarily hunger. But that might be a question we could explore individually a little bit more in depth to try to figure out exactly, depending on what you're eating and what's happening with blood sugar levels, et cetera. There's kind of a few possibilities there. Generally, though, if you eat enough, you reach satiety on these foods, and that's the amount of food that you need to eat to maintain optimum weight.
Great, thank you. And last question, on a whole food plant-based diet with osteoporosis, should I supplement with anything beside a high dark green leafy intake of 3 to 4 times a day?
Well, yeah, that's a good idea. But with osteoporosis, we want to make sure you're getting weight-bearing exercise, that you're not leaching the calcium out of your bones by eating salt or caffeine or sugar, and that your hormonal balance is normal. The gut microbiome in your gut is normal, so that your estradiol breaks down to estriol, and all those other kind of complex hormonal microbiome issues are sorted out. So osteoporosis have multiple things that contribute to it, not the least of which is too much protein, especially high sulfur amino acid protein. So we got to make sure all of those issues are addressed. And then finally, you got to make sure your vitamin D levels are normal. So you do a check on your blood for 25-dehydroxyvitamin D, and you got to make sure you have normal vitamin D, because if you don't have enough D, you're not going to be able to maintain calcium in the bone matrix. So low vitamin D, lack of weight-bearing exercise, high protein diet, too much salt in the diet, refined carbohydrates, all of these things can contribute to osteoporosis and bone balance.
Perfect. Dr. Goldhamer, thank you so much for your time.
It's my pleasure. Bye, AJ.
Bye, Dr. Goldhamer. Thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ and Friends. Please come back next Tuesday, which the date is February 18th at 2:30 p.m. Pacific time for Straight Talk with Dr. Doug Lisle, and he'll answer your questions as well. If you're interested in any of the events we talked about, going to Rancho La Puerta with me and Dr. Goldhamer, going to the Mendocino Stanford Inn where you can take your dog. It doesn't have to be a service dog, or going to the conference in Vegas, there's links, and there's also help@chefaj.com, or just subscribe to chefaj.com and get our weekly newsletter with all the information. If you want a free consultation with Dr. Goldhamer to see if True North is right for you, that link is also in the show notes.